are you? Coach Crazy Cat here. A little bit later, I was at the doctor with my grandma for our weekly trip up to our favorite doctor. Anyway, back home now, and we'll be closing out the book of Judges today. There's some really tough chapters in what I'm going to read today. I actually always wondered why these chapters were in the book, because it's some pretty rough topics. But the lesson is everybody doing what's right in his own eyes. And there's a couple of verses in Judges, Judges 17:6, that we'll touch on today. In those days there was no king, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And Judges 21:25, in those days there was no sovereign in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So they're blaming it on not having a king, but having rulership doesn't really change what people do. Our natural nature is to be in a sin nature. It says it in Galatians 5:15-26, and the works of the flesh are well known, which are these: adultery, whoring, uncleanness, indecency, idolatry, drug, sorcery, hatred, quarrels, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envy, murders, drunkenness, wild parties, and the like, of which I forewarn you, even as I said before, that those who practice such things shall not inherit the reign of Elohim. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no Torah, and those who are of the Messiah have impaled the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another and envying one another. And so maybe, like me, you listen to that list and you're like, well, I don't do that one. But if you really are serious about it, as I try to be, and I pray about this verse a lot, there's a lot on here that we naturally do, like selfish ambitions, dissensions, that's fighting, factions, splitting of the people, envy, any wanting something that somebody else has. Those are all sins, and that's our natural state. Nobody has to teach us to be that way. In fact, we have to go to the Word to learn ethics and morals, because there isn't really anywhere else to go for that. It's the only place where, if everybody operated off of the rules in this book, then we would be loving God and loving others, and there would be a whole lot less unhappiness, honestly. I used to be extremely unhappy when I wasn't spending time in this book, and it has changed my life since I've come back to it. So if you're not reading, I would just recommend that you do, or just reach out so I can pray with you and try to get you someone or a way for you. I have some resources where they read online. You can read with me if you don't mind my southern accent, whatever. I'm just reading online to hold myself accountable and to help anybody who the words of this amazing book can land on. Some additional verses, just as reminders. There's a bunch of them in Proverbs. Proverbs is great for this. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 21:2, all a man's ways are right in his own eyes, but Jehovah weighs the heart. Proverbs 26:12, have you seen a wise man in his own eyes? There is more expectancy for a fool than for him. Proverbs 3:7, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And in Isaiah 5:21, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. So it's just saying that we're born in a sin nature. All these sins, we're born with them. Some people may be, more naturally good, if you want to call it that, less likely to do some of the evil sins, but we all sin, and judgment's a sin. So anyway, if we're doing what's right in our own eyes, we're not going to be doing what's right in God's eyes. And as a reminder, an excellent resource for the study of Judges is the Verse by Verse Ministry. It's an easy page to get to. It's just versebyverseministry.org, and it's Pastor Stephen Armstrong. He was in the Air Force, and at age 30 got saved, and then he started spending time in this amazing book, and now he teaches going verse by verse. So they'll pick a chapter, and he goes verse by verse. Sometimes it's, a whole hour for six verses, and sometimes he gets through 2 chapters in an hour. You just don't know what you're going to get, but except a lot of background. And I loved his study on Judges. You could pop it on while you're driving or riding and be getting more out of the book than you're going to be getting by listening to people yammering on about all the stress that's going on in this world right now, because we're going to hear about that whether we watch the news or not. Because trust me, I hear my share, and I never watch the news. The television does not go on in my house. I can't stand it. Anyway, enough of that. So we're going to close out Judges 17 to 21, God willing. So we're going to be in some of the, what I consider to be the toughest verses in the Bible. And then tomorrow, God willing, we'll be in Ruth 1 through 4. And Ruth is just an absolutely glorious book, full of hope, full of mercy, full of grace. So it's just interesting how we close out with something that's really difficult to hear, followed by something that's amazing and the story of redemption. And it looks forward to Yeshua Messiah, who's going to come here and give us all a chance to not have to be stuck in what we've been given. So there we go. With that, let's close out Judges, God willing, and let me pray, because I'm going to need it. Father God, I just praise you for your incredible book and your word and the lessons that we can learn, even in the difficult sections, Father. And I just pray that you would be with me and that your words would come out. I am nothing other than your humble servant here to read your word. And I hope that it is doing what you would have it to do, Father, because this isn't about me. I just praise you in all, for all, and through all. And amen. All right, let's get going. Judges 17. And this is the third section. So remember, we had the first section, chapters 1 and 2, were an overview of what happens, right, by going back to idolatry. And then 3 through 16 were the 12 judges that judged, and a downward spiral in the ethics and the morals and the standards and people's trust in God as a general rule over that time. And everybody was pretty much, I mean, there's always a remnant that trusts God. That's the way it is at all times, including now. There's a certain subset of people who believe God and a lot of people who don't. The enemy's extremely powerful, and he's very good at keeping us stuck, and he kept me there for a long time. But anyway, I'll talk more about that at another time. But section 3, the final section, is how they ended up into apostasy, and it is small steps, right? But it's not very many small steps off the path until you're in a really bad place. So anyway, and there was a man from the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, and on which you put a curse, even saying in my eyes, look, the silver is with me, I took it. And his mother said, blessed of Jehovah be my son. So here we are in chapter 2, when we already see an odd story. The son, Micah, stole from his mom 1,100 pieces of silver, and she curses the person, but then he gives it back, and then she blesses him, but then she gives honor to God for it. We can throw around God's name, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God's in it. Jesus says in John that if we abide in him and ask anything in his Father's name, he will do it. But that abiding in him comes first, and that includes reading the word and in prayer, trying to stay towards the fruits of the Spirit and out of those other parts of Galatians 5 that we're talking about. So she's got a son who's a bad dude who stole the money, and then he brought it back, and then she's like, hey, you're awesome. And he gave back the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, I truly set apart the silver from my hand to Jehovah for my son, to make a carved image and a molded image, and now I'll give it back to you. So he gave the 1,100 pieces of silver to her, and then she goes, I'm going to set aside a piece of that because God brought it back to me, and I'm going to make a molten image to him, which we know from all of the reading that we've been doing, that God is unhappy with molten images. He does not want any image in his likeness. He's too great and wonderful for us to make anything like him. So he gave back the silver to his mother, and his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image, and they were in the house of Micah. Now the man Micah had a house of mighty ones. So he has a house of idols, and he made a shoulder garment and house idols. So a shoulder garment is what the priest would wear. So he's pretending to be the high priest in his own house with all these idols around, while he's glorifying God. So they're treating God like he's an idol, which is just classic. And he ordained one of his sons who became his priest. In those days, there was no sovereign in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So that's one of the verses that I just read. And we will hear, starting in Samuel, that they're going to beg for a king. They've been begging for a king because they think that having a human king is somehow going to keep them out of evil. But if you're not going to listen to God, which is what they were being ruled through, they were being ruled by God and his law, with various judges set aside, they're not going to be able to listen anymore to a king. And in fact, the king is going to steal from them too, which is going to turn out awesome. But anyway, this is kind of a precursor to that, is that they're going to have a king, but it's not going to get too much better. I mean, for moments it will, but not for the main. And there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the clan of Yehuda, and he was a Levite, and he was sojourning there. And the man went out of the city of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn wherever he could find a place. So you've got somebody out of the clan of the Levites, not in the serving part of the Levites. He was just in the major tribe part of the Levites, and he didn't have anywhere to live, so he takes off to try to figure out where he can live. And he comes to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah as he journeyed. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Yehuda, and I'm on my way to find a place to sojourn." And Micah said to him, "Dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I give you 10 pieces of silver per year and a suit of garments and your food." And the Levite went in. So the Levite agreed to dwell with the man, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. Then Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and he was in the house of Micah. And Micah said, "Now I know that Jehovah does good to me, since I have a Levite as a priest." So now we've got a dude named Micah who steals money from his mother. He gives it back, and his mother takes it off and has a bunch of carved and molded images made. So a bunch of idols. So his house is full of idols. And he had one of his sons. He said, "Why don't you be the priest?" Because they don't, I guess, feel like traveling down and doing what they're supposed to do. So doing what's right in your own eyes, you're like, you know what? I'm still serving God. I'm just going to do it from up here. It's just like one little step out of the way. And sure enough, then he's another step out of the way. He brings in this Levite and puts up this Levite as a priest. So the Levite's happy with himself, and so is Micah. So chapter 18, in those days there was no sovereign in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in, for until that day all their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not yet fallen to them. And the children of Dan sent 5 men of their clan, brave men from Sor and Eshtal, spy out the land and search it. I've been up really late getting my house organized. I was away so long, and I didn't do spring cleaning, so I'm doing it right now. So I apologize for being so sleepy. Go search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and spent the night there. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite and turned aside and said to him, "What brought you here? What are you doing in this place, and what do you have here?" And he said to them, "Micah did such and such for me, and he hired me, and I've become a priest." And they said to him, "Please inquire of Elohim, that we should know whether the journey on which we are going is prosperous." And the priest said to them, "Go in peace. Your journey on which you go is before Jehovah." So they're just making matters worse. They're throwing God's name around like we do today, and not really going to him to pray. And we need to be careful about that. Like, spend time in his word and actually spend time praying with him and not just talking about it. And I'm saying this to myself because I love God and I just want to honor him. It's just so easy in this world to get sucked into goo that can distract you from what's really important, which is reading the word, which is why I'm super grateful that he has me reading online, because I know I'm going to do it and get through. And then I'm doing extra studies while I'm cleaning up. I'm going through Samuel, and it's incredible. I think I'm going to start Matthew next. So anyway, I highly recommend doing additional studies while you clean your house. It's really awesome. Then the 5 men left and came to Laish and saw the people who were in their midst, how they dwelt safely according to the ruling of the Sidonians, at rest and unsuspecting, and no one possessing authority in the land was reproaching for any matter, and they were far from the Sidonians, and they had no word with anyone. Let me just pause here for a second and point out something as well. So at the start of this chapter, the Danites are looking for a place to live, but they had been given their inheritance. And it says here in chapter 1, verse 34, the Amorites pressed the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valleys. So Dan didn't do what God told them, and the Philistines were one that was extremely harassing of them. Remember, Samson came from the Philistines. The Philistines were really messing with them, and instead of doing what God said and trusting God and going in and taking care of the problem, the Amorites desired to dwell on Mount Heres and Ilon and Shebhim, and when the house of Joseph became stronger, they became compulsory labor. So they didn't actually take care of it, and now they're off like looking for a new place. So God gave them something perfect and great and good, and said that he would take care of them. But instead of listening, we're going to take off and find a new place to live. It's just bizarre to me. It's funny what we do when we're trying to run from God and run to the darkness. Oh, yeah, yeah. And the spies, so verse 8 of 18, and the spies came back to their brothers at Sor and Eshtal, and their brothers said, what do you say? And they said, arise and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and look, it is good. And you sit still and do not hesitate to go enter and possess the land. When you go, you are to come to an unsuspecting people, and the land is spacious, for Elohim has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of any matter which is on earth. So they found this beautiful area, the Sidonians, which is kind of off the beaten path, and no one's there, and they don't have to deal with war, so they're not ready for it. They're living in peace. So 600 men of the clan of the Danites went from there up to Sor and Eshtal, armed for battle, and when they went up and encamped in Kiriath Yearim and Yehuda, therefore they call the place Mana Dan to this day. See, it is west Kiriath Yearim. And they passed over from there to the mountains of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. And the 5 men who had gone out to spy out the land of Laish answered and said to their brothers, do you know there are in these houses a shoulder garment, a house idols, a carved image, and a molded image? And now you know what to do. So they're telling them to go in and take everything. So they turned aside, and there came to the house of the young Levite man, the house of Micah, and greeted him. And the 600 men armed for battle were of the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went up, and entering there, they took the carved image and the shoulder garment and the house idols and the molded image, while the priest stood at the entrance of the gate, while the 600 men who were armed for battle. And these went into Micah's house and took the idol and the shoulder garment and the house idols and the molded image. And the priest said, what are you doing? And they said to him, be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us and be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest in the household of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe and a clan in Yisrael? And the heart of the priest was glad, and he took the shoulder garment and the house idols and the carved image and took his place among the people. And they turned and went and put the little ones and the livestock and the valuables in front of them. And they had gone some distance from the house of Micah when the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan and called out to the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, what is the matter? Why that you have gathered such a company? And he said, you have taken away my mighty ones, which I made, and the priest, and you are leaving. Now what more do I have? And what is this you say to me? What is the matter? And the children of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest men, bitter of being, fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household. And the children of Dan went their way. And when Micah saw they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. And they took what Micah had made and the priest who belonged to him and went to Laish to the people who were at rest and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no word with anyone. And it was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. And they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. And they called the name of the city Dan, after Dan their father, who was born to Israel, but previously the name of the city was Laish. And the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day was taken into exile. And they set up for themselves the carved image of Micah, which he had made all the days that the house of Elohim was in Shiloh. So here we have Micah, who's a bad dude, worshiping idols, steals his mother's money, gives it back to her, and she takes it, makes more molded images, and then he hires this Levite to be his own little personal priest. This is just awesome, right? And it's not in keeping with God's law, which is love him and love others, because if you loved God, you wouldn't be going and breaking his laws like this. So then we got these guys of Dan who don't want to fight the Philistines and don't want to listen to what God said. They don't want to drive people out, and instead they'd rather go take land from innocent people, which they're going to do. And they want to have their own worship center because they don't want to have to travel all the way down to Jerusalem. And so they steal Micah's, Levite, and all of his images. And the Levite goes with them because he's like, hey, the heart of the priest was glad. And he took the shoulder garment, the house idols, and he took his place among the people. He's like, yeah, I'll be priest to a tribe. Why not? Crazy town, huh? I told you these chapters are tough. It's going to get worse. And it came to be in those days when there was no sovereign in Israel, there was a certain Levite sojourning on the further side of the mountains of Ephraim, and he took for himself a concubine of Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine, so he's married, I think, already, although it doesn't say that. But he takes a concubine, a woman who's unmarried, and he's hanging out with her. And his concubine went and slept with other people, committed whoring against him, and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Yehuda, and was there 4 new moons of days. So she's left him, ran home for 4 months. So at first I thought, oh, poor dude, she left, but he must have not been a very nice guy. And you're going to see that later. He was probably treating her pretty horribly that she decided to leave him and run back to her dad. So her husband arises, and he goes after her to speak to her heart and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. And she brought him into her father's house, and the father of the young woman saw him, and he was glad to meet him. And his father-in-law, the young woman's father, took hold of him, and he dwelt with him 3 days, and they ate and drank and spent the nights there. And it came to be on the 4th day, they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to leave. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart and piece of bread, and afterward go your way. So they went down, and the two of them ate and drank. And the young woman's father said to the man, please agree to stay all night and let your heart be glad. And when the man arose to go, his father-in-law urged him, so he spent the night there again. So this guy throws a 3-day party, and the man is ready to go back home. But the guy's father is looking at it as a way to as a reason to party, I guess. He's like, hey, let's just sit here and eat and drink, which maybe that's why his daughter was like, when the getting got hard, she took off and ran. Who knows why her morals were the way they were, but anyway, so he keeps urging him to stay on. And on the 5th day, the one young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until the afternoon, and both of them ate. And the man arose to go, him and his concubine and his servant. But his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, see, the day is drawing toward the evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Stay here and let your heart be glad. And you shall rise early tomorrow for your journey, and you shall go to your tent. But the man would not stay that night, and he arose and left, and came to a place opposite of Yebus, that is Jerusalem. And with him there were the two saddled donkeys, and his concubine with him. And they were near Yebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night. And the master said, let's not turn aside here in the city of foreigners, who are not of the children of Israel, but we shall pass over to Gibeah. And he said to, and remember, Gibeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure Gibeah is in Manasseh. And that's where Jephthah and those guys were from. I'm pretty sure that's right. And he said to his servant, come and let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah. Oh, no, Gibeah's in Benjamin. And they passed over and went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So I apologize. It was in Benjamin. But Benjamin had not driven out either. Oh, yes, because Benjamin is going to be a bad place here in a second. Benjamin. I know they didn't drive out. They were the first one. Yes. Judges 1:21. However, the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. And so the Jebusites have dwelt with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem until this day. And look what's going to happen. It's pretty bad. Okay. So they went to spend the night in Gibeah. So he went in and he sat down in the open square, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. And this is highly unusual at this day and time. If somebody came and they were of your nationality, which they are, and you had a place for them to sleep and a place for them to take care of their animals, you would have them come in. But these people are self-centered and rude, and then they're going to get even more rude and vile, and left them to sleep out in the square. I can't even imagine doing that to people. But see, an old man came in from his walk in the field, and was from the fields of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he lifted his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going, and where do you come from? And he said to him, we are passing over from Bethlehem and Yehuda to the other side of the mountains of Ephraim. I am from there, and I went to Bethlehem and Yehuda, and I'm going to the house of Jehovah, but there is no one taking me in this house. Yet there is both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself and for your female servant and for the young man who is with your servant. There is no lack of any matter. And the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all your needs be on me. Only do not spend the night in the open square. And he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. They were making their hearts glad. And see, the men of the city, the sons of Belial, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they spoke to the master of the house. And the old man said, bring out the old man who came to your house so we may know him. But the master of the house, went out to him and said, no, my brothers, I beg you, do not evil, because this man is coming to my house. Do not this folly. Look, here is my maiden daughter and the man's concubine. So his 2 daughters, so one daughter who's not been with anybody, and his other daughter who's a concubine. Let me bring them out now and humble them and do what's good in your eyes, but do not do such a foolish matter to this man. But the men would not listen to him. So the men took a hold of his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and rolled themselves on her all night until the morning, and let her go when the day began to break. Horrible, isn't it? Shocking. And as morning appeared, the woman came back and fell at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out on his way and saw the concubine fallen at the door with her hands on the threshold. And he said, "Rise up, let us get going." But there was no answer. And he took her on the donkey, and the man rose and went to his place. And when he came to his place, he took a knife, because she died, and he took a hold of her and cut her up by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout the borders of Israel. And it came to be that all who saw it said, there never has been anything like this from the day the children of Israel came up from the land of Mitzrayim until this day. Set your heart on it and take counsel and speak up. This is just an absolutely horrendous story, and it's just like something that you would see on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, or that happens probably any day here in our country and in lots of countries around the world. There's lots of people being kidnapped, being brought in to be sex slaves, all kinds of really horrible things that are happening in this day and age. And I think this story is in the Word just to let us know how far off the path we fall when we don't have Messiah in our heart, and when we don't trust Jesus, and we don't spend time in this book. Because when we don't spend time here, we make our own right. We make our own laws. So maybe, you would be a naturally better person than I would. Maybe naturally you're like, well, I would never do that to somebody. And maybe naturally without God, who knows what I'm capable of. I mean, I did some pretty horrible things on my own when I wasn't with God. So who knows? And we shouldn't judge. If you have found God, then judging someone else who hasn't is not appropriate. I mean, Jesus hung out with sinners. Jesus, that's who he was kind to, because he realized that they were lost. And when you're lost, you're blinded. Because you don't understand, and you don't know how far off the path you are because you haven't come back to the Word. And that's the whole lesson for me in this story. I never really understood it before, but I do love the take that Pastor Stephen Armstrong has about this, and about how it just speaks to our evil nature and how we end up in a bad place really quickly without the Lord. And he had to come and take our sins, because I can't even go a day without sinning, much less a lifetime. And Jesus was the only one who was able to do that. He humbled himself. Can you imagine speaking all this into existence and humbling yourself and coming down here and being treated really horribly? I can't even imagine it. All right, so chapter 20, let's see what happens now. It's going to kick off a civil war, the second civil war we read about in Judges. So that civil wars also happen, which we're not too far off from one in this country, are we? Because we've removed God from the schools, we've removed God from our lives, we don't spend time with God, we're blocked out of churches right now, and there's a lot of negativity on the news. So turning off the TV and turning on your heart to this book really can bring you peace in times that are crazy. Without this book, I would be an absolute train wreck right now. I know it. I would be bawling, crying, angry, aggravated, activist, trying to fight back, trying to scratch and claw. But I know that I'm here because God has a mission for me. And when I'm gone, I'm going to be with Jesus. So this world doesn't really have anything that's exciting. I just want to be here to do God's mission until he's ready for me to go. Because this place, it's really difficult, and I can't wait to be in his presence and be in a non-sin nature, so we don't have to fight it anymore, and I can just read the book all day long. It's going to be amazing. I love this book. It's going to last forever, and so I'm so excited to spend time in it now and just learn more and more and more as time goes on. It's going to be so awesome. Anyway, enough of that. Chapter 20. And all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man before Jehovah at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people and the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of Elohim, 400 foot soldiers who drew the sword. And the men of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the children of Israel said, "Speak up now, how did this evil come about?" And the man, the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "My concubine and I went into Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. And the masters of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They thought to kill me, but instead they humbled my concubine, and she died. When I took my concubine and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout all the hand of the inheritance of Israel, because they committed wickedness and folly in Israel. Look, you are all children of Israel, speak and give your counsel here." And all the people arose as one man, saying, "Let not one of us go into his tent, nor any of us turn back to his house. And now This is what we do in Gibeah. Go against it by lot. And we shall take 10 men out of every 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of every 1,000, and 1,000 out of every 10,000 to make food for the people, to prepare for their going to Gibeah and Benjamin, for all the folly they did in Israel. And all the men of Israel were gathered together against the city, knit together as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this evil that has come about among you? And now give us men, the sons of Belial, who are in Gibeah. So we put them to death and put away the evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, so the children of Israel, so the children of Benjamin gathered together from their cities to Gibeah to go to battle against the children of Israel. And from their cities at that time, the children of Benjamin registered 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who registered 700 chosen men. Among all this people were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. So they were excellent warriors, and they were left-handed. So it would be harder to fight them because they would be coming at a different angle. And besides Benjamin, the men of Israel registered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were men of battle. And the children of Israel rose and went up to Bethel to ask of Elohim. And they said, who of us shall go first to battle with the children of Benjamin? And Jehovah said, Judah first. And the children of Israel arose in the morning and encamped at Gibeah. And the men of Israel went to battle against Benjamin. And the men of Israel put themselves in battle array to fight at Gibeah. And the children of Benjamin came out of Gibeah, and that day cut down to the ground 22,000 men of Israel. So it's a really interesting turn of events. I'm not 100% sure I understand why God has them go these 3 times, and the first time they lose, other than to say, maybe it's to tell the whole country a lesson. And 3 is always representative of God, because it's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So it really means that it came from him, and it's a lesson that they've gotten pretty far out of the way. They're doing what's right in their own eyes. They're not listening to him, and he's the only cure for all of this. But he does allow them to pretty much wipe out this tribe of Benjamin eventually. 22. But the people, the men of Israel, strengthened themselves again and formed battle line where they had put themselves in array the first day. And the children of Israel went up and wept before Jehovah until evening, and asked of Jehovah, should I again draw near for battle against the children of my brother Benjamin? And Jehovah said, go up against him. And the children of Israel drew near to the children of Benjamin on the second day, and they went against them from Gibeah and cut down to the ground 18,000 more. So now 22,000 plus 18. So 40,000 Jewish people have died, non-Benjamites. Benjamin is winning this battle so far. And all the children of Israel, even all the people, went up and came to Bethel and wept and sat before Jehovah. And they fasted until evening, and they offered ascending offerings and peace offerings before Jehovah. Maybe it's because they're offering peace offerings and ascending offerings, and they ask. And the children of Israel asked of Jehovah. The ark of covenant of Elohim was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, shall I go again to battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And Jehovah said, go up, for tomorrow I'll give them into your hand. And Yisrael set ambushers all around Gibeah, and the children of Yisrael went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day and put themselves in battle array against Gibeah as at other times. And the children of Benjamin came out to meet the people, drawn away from the city, and began to strike some of the people, saying as at other times, in the highways, of which went up to Bethel on the other side of Gibeah on the field about 30 men of Yisrael. And the children of Benjamin said, they are going to be smitten before us as previously, but the children of Israel said, let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose from their place and put themselves in battle at array at Baal Tamar. And the ambush of Israel broke forth from their position at Meir Gibeah, and 10,000 chosen men from all Israel came against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce, but they did not know calamity was close to them. And Jehovah smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed 25,100 men. On that day, all those who drew the sword. And the children of Benjamin saw they were smitten, and the men of Israel had given ground to the Benjamites, because they trusted in the ambush they had set against Gibeah. And the ambush hurried and came against Gibeah, and the ambush spread out, and they struck the entire city with the edge of the sword. And the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the ambush was they would make a great cloud of smoke rise up from the city, and the men of Israel would turn in battle, and Benjamin would begin to strike dead about 30 men of Israel, for they said, they are indeed smitten before us as at the first battle. Then the cloud began to rise from the city, and the smoke of the cloud, and the Benjamites looked and saw the entire city going up its smoke to heavens. When the men of Israel turned back, the men of Benjamin were troubled, and they saw that calamity was close to them, and they turned their backs before the children of Israel toward the way of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, while those that had come out of the cities were destroying them in the midst. And they surrounded the Benjamites and pursued them with ease trampled them down as far as Gibeah toward the east, and their fellow of Benjamin 18,000 men. All of these were mighty men. And they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they cut down 5,000 of them on the highways and followed them after Gidom and struck 2,000 of them. And all those who fell of Benjamin that day were 25,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were mighty men. 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they dwelt at the rock of Rimmon for 4 new moons, so 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword from every city, men, beasts, all who were found, and set fire to the cities they came to. So they pretty much have wiped all but the grace of God wiped out the tribe of Benjamin. Because God had made the promises to the tribes, he's going to keep this remnant out of Benjamin that's going to be started again, even using a crazy way, starting in 21. So we have 600 who ran, and they are alive. And the men of Israel swore an oath at Mitzpah, saying, not any of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife. So here we go, another oath, which they're going to have to keep. Oath swearing is a really bad idea. I would not recommend it. Just do your best, pray, ask for God's guidance, and go with it. He's going to help you. If you sin, as I do quite often, he will pull you back, be with you. Trust is what it takes. Through faith, Abraham. So the people came to Bethel and sat there until the evening before Elohim and lifted up their voice and wept bitterly and said, "O Jehovah, Elohim of Israel, why has this come about in Israel that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel?" And it came to be on the morrow, the people rose early and built a slaughter place there and built ascending offerings and peace offerings. And the children of Israel said, "Who is there among the tribes who did not come up with the assembly to Jehovah? For they have made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to Jehovah at Mitzpah, saying, he shall certainly be put to death." And the children of Israel were very sorry for Benjamin, their brother. So now they have remorse for what has taken place and said, "One tribe is cut off from Israel today. What did we do for wives for those who remain, seeing we have sworn by Jehovah not to give them our daughters as wives?" And they said, "Which one of the tribes of Israel did not come up to Mitzpah to Jehovah? And see, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people called a roll, see, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. And the congregation sent out there 12,000 of their bravest men and commanded, saying, Go, you shall strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, even the women and children. And this is what you will do. Put under the ban every male and every woman who has known man by lying with them." And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young maidens who had not known a man, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. And all the congregation sent and spoke to the children of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin turned back at that time, and they gave them women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, but even so there were not enough. And the people were sorry for Benjamin because they had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. And the elders of the congregation said, "What do you do for the wives who remain?" Says, "The women have been destroyed out of Benjamin." And they said, there is an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, and no tribe is to be destroyed from Israel. But we are unable to give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, Cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, "See, there's a yearly festival of Jehovah in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, south of Lebanon." And they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, "Go and lie wait in the vineyards and watch. And when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, you shall come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And it shall be when their fathers or their brothers come to complain that we shall say, Favor us with them, because we did not take a wife of any of them in battle, neither have you given them to making yourselves guilty of your oath." And the children of Benjamin did so, and took wives for their number from those who danced, whom they caught when they went and returned to their inheritance. And they rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. And the children of Israel went from there at a time, each one to his own tribe and clan, and they went from there, each one to his own inheritance. In those days there was no sovereign, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. What a fitting way to end the book of Judges, about doing what's right in our own eyes, because this is just fraught with sadness. Just breaks my heart. But if I look at anything on the news or in our society today, none of this is a shock, right? You wouldn't expect to read about it in the Bible, but I think what God's telling us here is that this is what happens. This is the natural state of man without God in it, and it's a pretty sad place to be. And it's just a lesson to me to stay in the Word and to stay close to God and to be listening to Him, because we have no other hope except in Yeshua Messiah. So with that, let's close. Father God, I just praise you for your word and for the book of Judges with all of its many lessons, as difficult as they are to hear, Father. I know everything in here was inspired by you and penned of your men for us and saved throughout the ages, so we can hear what you have to say and we can seek out your lessons for us in your word, Father. I just praise you in all and for all. Amen. All right, so tomorrow we'll be starting a new book, God willing. We'll be in the book of Ruth, which will be awesome. Ruth has taken place at this period of Judges. Ruth is about the remnant, so there is a believing remnant that comes through all of this. It's going to be out of the tribe of Judah, and it's going to be the line of David that is going to be saved throughout all of this disaster and mess. So God brings out, God's always, he's in the mess too. He doesn't start the mess, he doesn't create the mess, but he sees the mess, and he always saves his people through the mess, which he does for those of us who are his children. And the lesson in Ruth is just a lesson all about that. So God willing, we'll wrap that up tomorrow, and then we'll be starting in Samuel. And the readings over, once we start in Samuel, for the next several weeks, will be an intermix between Samuel and Psalms and Samuel and Chronicles and Samuel and Kings, because Kings, Chronicles, and Samuel are all different recordings of the same stories. And so hearing the full story at the time helps to pull it all together. So it will be a while when we're in all of that. And when we wrap it up, we'll go into Isaiah and the minor prophets later on. So it's going to take us a little bit. It's about 90 days worth of reading. So God willing, we'll get through a little bit quicker than that, and we will see where it takes us and what happens. But we are in I think it's day 94 or 95 right now, which is pretty awesome. So 1/4 of the way through the Bible, which shows what can be accomplished with consistency. So it doesn't take that much reading every day to actually be able to finish it up. And I love that, because I used to put it off and I would be like, well, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow. And once I got started, I can't put it down. Yeah, we just finished day 95. So we're over 1/4 of the way through reading the book, which is just absolutely incredible and such an honor and a blessing. And I look forward to being back with you tomorrow on the book of Ruth. Have a blessed and beautiful day wherever you are. Bye now.